loved being in nature, and he deeply loved his wife, Janet. Tom saw the bigger picture. He saw how things fit together on a broader scale. But as an engineer, he could also be found working in the smallest details of life. He spent much of his time in the past year making sure Janet would know how to handle all those small details, right once he had died, right down to what handyman to call should something go awry in the house. Leave it to Tom to make sure those small details were handled. He also planned the service, the readings and songs, who would speak. And this is the message Tom left us. It stands out in bas relief against the backdrop of his life. It wasn't a sudden epiphany he had post-diagnosis. It was the way he always lived, and he wanted us to learn it too. He wanted us to learn a different way than what we had been taught. We have been taught as a society, as a culture, to turn away from the woundedness of our human kin, to turn away from that which we would reject in ourselves, would deny is true of ourselves. Tom knew how turning away from one another only creates a world of lonely people living in their own silos of despair and regret, anxiety and pain. His desire was that we would turn to one another, turn to face our lives and this world with all its beauty and pain. As Peter was reading that poem, the line that said, "And then someone turned," that was Tom, wasn't it? He was like one of the first ones to turn. And he spent all his life turning, not away from the pain, not away from the fear, not away from the diagnosis, but turning into it because he knew that there, only when we turn into those things would we experience the fullness of life. And that's how he lived his life. That's how he was so self-aware, because he always turned. He turned to himself, he turned to his relationship with Janet, he turned to his work, and he said, this is where the truth is, this is where the center is, and this is where I will stand. It wasn't anything new. He'd always lived that way. When he received the diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, that didn't plunge him into an identity crisis, because he always had turned to who he was, and he knew who he was who he was, regardless of his health. He knew that till his dying day. His life was always his message, and now it rests within our hearts and lives. I met with Tom and Janet not long after his diagnosis to talk about this day, this service. And I said, what do you want people to know? And he said, I want to stay calm and be peaceful as I travel down this road that I found myself upon. He said he wanted to be known that he loved his job, he loved his relationship with Janet, and that he was a geek. That he loved to watch football and keep score himself. He was a geek. The last time I spoke with Tom was on Friday, not long before he died. I met with him alone in his room, and I asked him if he had any regrets or if he had any unfinished business. And without hesitation, he said no. He said, I've lived a good life. Janet and I were able to love one another deeply for 30 years. I had a great career and a lot of good friends. He said, I'm sorry I have to leave Janet, but I don't have any regrets. He paused then and said he knew it wouldn't be long, that the time was drawing near where he would leave us. We sat in silence then, and gracious as ever, he thanked me for coming. And as I left, I thought, he did it. He fulfilled his desire to stay calm and be peaceful, something we all could learn. A long life can never be guaranteed, but a good life can. Tom lived a good life. A life filled with love and hope, with courage and grace. A life lived to the fullest. A life in which he was present to every single moment. He had the love of his wife, Janet, her son and his family, grandchildren that he claimed, as well as his own biological family. He had friends and other co-conspirators in his life. He had it all, if just for too short a time. Still, Tom lived more in his 73 years than many people do who live to be 90. I was reminded of this poem by Charles Bukowski. He writes, "When Whitman wrote, 'I sing the body electric,' I know what he meant. I know what he wanted. To be completely alive every moment in spite of the inevitable. We can't cheat death, but we can make it work so hard that when it does take us, it will have known a victory just as perfect as ours." This is the victory we witness today. The victory of a life fully lived. It's hard to imagine this world without Tom. He may not have been a public figure known the world over, but he changed his world and the lives of those of us who are privileged to share it with him. We who are left behind must now find the courage to carry on. But that doesn't mean we should turn away from our tears, our grief. Indeed, in order to live our lives fully, we must do as Tom wished, to turn to one another, to witness one another's grief. The grief that his death leaves us, to turn into our pain, to turn into our tears, to turn into our anger and our despair at a loss taken so soon. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to mourn. And it's also okay to be glad. We can breathe deeply the air of life and be grateful, both for our time and for Tom's. Janet told me not so long ago that as she was sitting there thinking about her relationship with Tom, she realized that not once in their marriage did she ever regret being married to him. Not once did she ever think, oh, maybe this was a bad choice. Not once did she think, if only he would do this. And he felt the same way. It's kind of funny how they made it work. The engineer and the musician. The suit and the flower child. But they did. And one of the things that Tom loved most about Janet was her music. And so now we're going to hear again, chosen by Tom, this song that was his favorite that she wrote, called The Other Side.
I don't understand, I don't know what's withholding. I don't understand, I don't know where I'm going. Come and take my hand, won't you show me what's in the future?
There's a story about a little village of grubs at the bottom of a pond. And it was a peaceful village, not much happening, but every now and again, inexplicably, one of the grubs would just float away, and no matter how much their family and friends pleaded with them to come back, they never did. So there were these three friends who made a pact. They said, if one of us ever floats away, we're going to come back and tell the others where we went. And sure enough, as they were playing one day, one of them started to float away, and his two friends said, remember your promise, come back. And he said, I will. And he got to the top of the pond and became a dragonfly. And he hovered over the surface of the water, sad that he couldn't tell his friends where he had gone. But he ultimately flew away, happy knowing that one day they would experience that great transformation for themselves. I don't know what happens when we die. But as Mike said, I do know that we are all made of energy, and energy never dies. So Tom is with us still, as far away as the shooting star we might see tonight, and as close as the next breath we take in. So now as we have a reception following the service, we invite you to stay and stick around. Considering the closing song, I'd rather think maybe you should have made hot dogs, but please stick around. And now as we extinguish this chalice, let us carry the flame of Tom's light in our hearts and go in peace. I don't care if I ever get back, and we'll root for the home teams.
If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 straight sure.